Welcome to Establish the Edge. I am your host, Mike Leone, bringing you a special solo podcast. It's also being simulcast on the Establish the Run YouTube channel, so you can check it out over there. Today's topic is win your rookie draft. I'm going to go through an article I did as part of the Establish the Run draft kit and basically go through my strategy for the first two rounds of rookie drafts, also give some tips for later in drafts. I've ranked players in tiers on pick number and kind of going to go through those tiers and talk about why I have the players ranked in those tiers, where you can actually draft them, what's a realistic target, and maybe what are some trade ideas that you can do, if you don't want to make this selection at that pick number. Before I get into it any further, do want to remind you that if you rate and review the podcast on iTunes, it helps a ton. Similarly, on YouTube, subscribe to the Establish the Run channel, give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot. So I have these rankings in tiers. They're heavily aligned with our Dynasty rankings, which I'm pulling up right now on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, that Anthony Amico heads up for us at Establish the Run. It's a team effort, but Amico really heads that up, does a phenomenal job. Part of the reason why my rankings tiers are a little bit different than what Amico has as our default rankings is I'm trying to take into consideration a few more things to make my draft list super actionable. One, I'm baking in some more of the market sentiment. I don't want to be too away from the market, and I'm in leagues where it's a lot of sharper players. They absolutely hate running backs. And I'm taking that into account in those leagues and adjusting for market sentiment in those leagues. So my ranks for different leagues might be different. In FFPC leagues where people are pretty RB thirsty, I'm taking that into account because it's good to be deviate some from the market because that's how you establish an edge. But it's bad to be so far from the market that you're operating in a different universe. That's how you might end up with the team that has zero good running backs and a bunch of receiver depth that you can't utilize or get good value in the trade market. You have to be somewhat tethered to what the market is actually doing to maximize your edge in these leagues. I also, a little bit of IKB, some I know better from Adam Levitan has spilled over to me. So there are some guys that I just, for whatever reason, like a little bit more than Amico likes. And finally, and this kind of goes hand in hand with understanding your league's market value for these players, but I also have a good understanding of how I build teams, what are the strengths and weaknesses of my teams, and just acknowledging that and working from that. So a good example of that is, we have in our dynasty rankings Drake London ahead of Breece Hall by a little bit. I've got in my personal rankings and tiers Breece Hall ahead of Drake London. I know I build wide receiver heavy teams quite frequently. I think in a vacuum, Drake London might have more value than Breece Hall. But, I have to account for the fact that I'm building these really wide receiver heavy teams. And um, in addition to that, we generally have these rankings a little bit more aggressive on wide receivers than running backs because running backs, they have a lot of issues in terms of their longevity that wide receivers don't have. And the market doesn't fully take that into account. So our ranks are accounting for that, I think, in a really sharp way. But again, if you are systematically doing that and you always have similar wide receivers valued over similar running backs, you do at a certain point need good running backs to win these dynasty leagues, especially if they're shallower leagues where you have to be really good at every single starting position. So I'm not going to win if I always take the wide receiver over the running back. I'm going to win by taking the running back when opportunity cost is at its smallest and I'm sacrificing the least amount of value. So that's why I have Breece Hall in the same tier as Drake London but a little bit ahead of Drake London in my personal rankings. And finally, before we get into these ranks, do want to acknowledge I have some bias. It's hard to do content sometimes because you want skin in the game, and I have skin in the game, but the skin in the game I have is in specific leagues that are generally a lot deeper. This is all Superflex tight end premium, by the way, and these ranks are based off that. I play in a lot of leagues that are pretty deep, both in terms of the amount of players that you carry over from one year to the next and in terms of starting roster spots. And you're going to build a little bit differently if you're in shallower leagues that don't carry over as many players. I think a good example is FFPC leagues, which I am in some, and those leagues have actually kicked off. So I have some evidence of drafts I've already started. Most of my other drafts will start tomorrow. But in those FFPC leagues where there's this big cut down to like some of them cuts down to 14 skill players, and it's almost like, Pat Crane calls it an extended keeper league. And in those cases, I have a little bit more value placed on immediate running back production because I can't carry over developmental wide receivers from one year to the next. I'm going to have to cut them anyway. So at that point, I might as well bank some immediate running back production. So there's going to be some differences there. But again, overall, my sentiment is not towards those leagues. It's more towards deeper leagues. And that might cloud my judgment a little bit. So I just want the listener to be aware of that potential bias. So, okay, let's get into it. Tier 1, Breece Hall, Drake London. As far as who to pick, if you have the 101 or 102, I think it's fine to go off need. I think Hall, though, is a really strong pick. He's an elite running back prospect. And again, this is a really good time to grab a running back with the type of upside that we want without strain for market value too much. You're not sacrificing much, especially if you look in our overall dynasty ranking. So I think he's a bit of a slam pick at the 101. He's not going to slip in the vast majority of leagues. Every single league I've done so far, Breece Hall has gone with the first overall pick. So if you're rebuilding your wide receiver needy, you might go London. I would try to trade down first. Or if you're at the 102, I think taking London's fine. Again, I would try to trade down though. I do think Breece Hall is fine on rebuilding teams because there should be a really strong trade window for him next season. He's such a good prospect. You've seen what players like Jonathan Taylor can do in the trade market. I guess the concern for Breece Hall is like if you look at someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the trade market was never there for him as it just didn't work out and it just continued to go down and down and down. And if you were a rebuilding team that took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you basically completely wasted a premium rookie pick selection. Now, Helaire wasn't an elite prospect. He was an elite landing spot, and perhaps we boosted him too much. Jonathan Taylor, elite prospect, trade market value is like absolutely there. Of course, you can't count on Breece hitting in that exact way, but I think there will be a window next off season. So I did have one league that hasn't drafted yet, but I had the 101 and I traded it. I have a really strong team, pretty stacked at wide receiver, and I would have taken Breece Hall happily at the 101, needed running back help, but I think this team can win now. So I moved him for DeAndre Swift, and we have those two in our rankings basically back to back. I think we have Swift 1 or 2 spots ahead, but for a win now team, I prefer Swift a little bit because that production is going to be there from day one this year moving forward. Some trade ideas here. I saw someone respond to a tweet that I made asking for people's trades. You can find that on Twitter if you look at me at 2hats1mike there. You can see some actual trades people have done in their rookie draft so far. But someone traded the 101 for the 102 and 105. If you're not super RB needy and you're okay passing on Breece Hall, I think that's a great trade. I mean, you take advantage of the market's overconfidence in Hall. You get Drake London, who we have in the same tier as Breece Hall, and you're just basically getting a free lottery ticket at the 105, which is going to be a tier 2, tier 3 wide receiver, which is really strong. And those are plus EV moves. And along that line of reasoning too, I traded in one league the 102 and a future 2023 second for the 107 and 108 in a league. And part of the reason I did that was did not want to take Kenneth Walker, a second overall pick. Talk more about him in a second. But taking advantage of also like the pick variance in drafts. I mean, people can do some weird things. We don't like Kenneth Walker. We know he's going to go in the top 4 picks. So that pushes down someone that we like a spot. There was an FFPC league where James Cook went 3rd overall. If people do 1 or 2 weird things, you're really going to benefit by trading down a little bit. So I think if you're evaluating trade downs, if it comes out and you think it's a break-even trade, if the draft goes exactly how you have it ranked, you should make that trade because any deviation from how you think the draft should go is going to be plus EV on your side. So it's essentially a small free roll on the pick variance there. Tier 2, Traylon Burks. Again, Amico's rankings, very pro wide receiver, has Burks just behind London and actually ahead of Hall. With Burks being the fifth or the sixth wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft, and just looking at some ADP, I've slotted him in his own tier, which might seem a little weird, but his own tier between London, Hall, and then the other wide receivers. I do think you can get Burks usually at the 103 or the 104, possibly the 105. I saw London fall as far as the 105 in a draft, but the floor on Burks is a little bit shakier than on London. Ceiling's incredible. We love the ceiling. Uh, Anthony Amico's comps for Traylon Burks show sort of the boom bust nature of this, where he's got Julio Jones, AJ Green, AJ Brown, some of these bigger wide receivers, Mike Evans, Calvin Johnson as comps in his range of outcomes. So absurd ceiling. Also has some mega busts in JJ Arcega-Whiteside, N'Keal Harry, Michael Floyd, and James Hardy. So that sort of gives you a sense of what you're getting yourself into with Traylon Burks. But do want to note that here, and really like any of your first round picks, but in this middle of the first round in particular, just keep in mind this is a weaker rookie draft. We only had one quarterback go in the first round. He's not super exciting. Kenny Pickett, that right away weakens the depth of a super flex tight end premium rookie draft. And if you just look at what happened last year, which was a deep draft, and we had a lot of quarterbacks, Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, I mean, at times those guys went at the 201. They would be the second to fourth overall pick somewhere in there this year. So keep in mind, it's a weaker class. And next year's class, I've seen some mock drafts, not for dynasty fantasy, but for real NFL draft, to have 4 quarterbacks going in the top 10. If that happens, and those quarterbacks all likely have more upside than Kenny Pickett, all of a sudden that immediately is going to make the dynasty superflex rookie draft pretty deep next season. So if you can trade current picks and be patient and get firsts plus next year, I think that's a really good idea to explore. I don't mind trading the 103 for a 2023 first and second, especially if it's from a team that has some downside and you'd be picking earlier middle. But it's going to be a great chance next year to either get a quarterback in super flex rookie drafts, which you can't always do, or some of the skill players are going to be pushed down because QB needy teams are going to have quarterbacks to pick from early in those rookie drafts. Third tier, picks 104 to 106. I've got wide receiver Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jameson Williams. Love hitting wide receiver here. We have Wilson a small gap ahead of Olave and Jameson Williams, but I think it's close enough that they're grouped together in the same tier. Generally, all these players are off the board by 107-ish. Sometimes they'll slip to 108, 109. Wilson's not going to slip. Usually it's Olave who slips. If one of them slips, Wilson, you probably got to take it by 105, 104, 105. Olave or Williams, 106, 107. Maybe Olave down to the 109. Some trade ideas from the 5th pick. Justin Herzig traded the 105. So Garrett Wilson is what that pick ended up being. For the 106, Chris Olave and Mike Gesicki in a tight end premium league. Classic case of taking advantage of the market mentality of go get your guy. You got to get Garrett Wilson. And, we've got Wilson ahead, but to add an immediate, a strong contributor in Mike Gesicki, I think that's like a clear, those are the types of trades. Those are the money ball types of trades that we like to make. Don't be overconfident. Take advantage of overconfidence. And also know your league mates. If Kenneth Walker falls to the, this range, he's probably not going to fall past pick 104. I've seen him go second and third the vast majority of the time. But if he falls to the 4th pick and someone's itching to trade up for him, you can trade down, get one of these wide receivers and maybe pick up something else. Or if there's a QB thirsty team, this is more with this next tier of 4 picks 107, 108. But there's a QB thirsty team at 107, 108. They might want to come up for Kenny Pickett. They might overpay to do so because there's not a big ability for them to get quarterbacks in this draft. So know your league mates. Take advantage of that in the trade market. And in this 4th tier, do have Kenneth Walker and Kenny Pickett. We've railed on Walker quite a bit the last week or two. He fell at 12th, which was egregious in our mock draft that I did with Evan Silva and Anthony Amico that you can find on the Established Run YouTube page. I also put out a YouTube video talking about why Walker's overvalued. All that said, there's a difference between overvalued and, someone who's just not a good selection. And Walker is a good prospect. According to Player Profiler, had a 99th percentile dominator rating in college, 96th percentile speed score. There is stuff to like about Walker, even though we're really concerned about the receiving profile. I would boost him up to, I would say if you're real running back needy in the right league format, I would take him as early as 104, ahead of those tier 3 wide receivers, except, sacrificing some of that value. I think that's reasonable if you really need a running back. I think it's a little bit more reasonable, again, in these FFPC leagues where you can't hold players forever, and that in some way diminishes the value on the longevity of the wide receivers. It's a little bit more reasonable to take Walker earlier. You're never going to get him where I have him ranked, the 107, 108. Just absolutely not going to happen. Pickett, somewhat boring as a dynasty pick, but in Superflex, starting quarterbacks, he's going to get 3-ish years of starting quarterback, like almost no matter how good he is. And it's not going to be elite production, but it should be fine enough. And that's sort of your floor. And that's a really good floor because if I built some teams with shaky quarterbacks and startups, and when they die, it doesn't matter how good your team is. If you sometimes you literally cannot find a quarterback that can be tough to get in the trade market. So I think Pickett's fine here. I took him at the 108 in a league where I was, loaded at wide receiver, so I didn't want to take Sky Moore ahead of him this early. Didn't really need the quarterback. Wanted to trade the pick, wasn't able to trade the pick. It's just going to be good trade value down the line. You can generally move quarterbacks in super flex. One move I did try to make in that league where I needed an RB2 and again, loaded at wide receiver, fine at quarterback. Tried to trade Pickett for Aaron Jones in the 304. Felt like that was a fairish offer. Did not get accepted, but that's the type of thing you could look for if you're looking for a win now move. But again, this is another pick that you could move for a 2023 first in a straight swap, and I think be okay. Tier 5, picks 109 to 201. We get Sky Moore, David Bell, James Cook, a running back, George Pickens, and Jahan Dotson. Could possibly have Sky Moore and David Bell in their own tier here, or Sky Moore, I think, is close to being in that tier ahead, the tier 4 with Walker and Pickett in the right spot. I would take more. I did take more over Pickett in our mock draft, or I took him over Walker, excuse me. But I think if you need wide receiver, he's fine. I like him and Bell a lot as guys that have long-term upside, but real clear paths to short-term productivity, especially in the case of David Bell in Cleveland. With Jarvis Landry gone, there's not much there. Bell is someone Amico has comps that have like pretty high floor. He notes in his prospect profile that Bell compares favorably to numerous first-round prospects like AJ Green, Sammy Watkins, Justin Blackman, Michael Crabtree, Kendall Wright. These players, all had high levels of success. And the players that he comped to that didn't reach 15 PPR points per game within 3 seasons were Kendall Wright, who had 13.4, Michael Crabtree at 12.4, Michael Floyd at 12.4, and Robert Woods at 10.4. And Woods obviously went on to have a good career. So his floor seems pretty strong, and he looks like a tremendous value. So I'm excited about Bell because I got him at the 206 in an FFPC league. 2 other leagues that, if I was more active, I would have tried to trade up to get him. He went 210 and 211. So this is definitely a spot you could trade down. You can't trade down. If you want Sky Moore, you generally have to take him at the 109. I think there's some consensus there. But David Bell, if you want him, you can trade down for sure into the second round, start of the second round in most leagues drafts, if they're not following ETR and get him. So he right now to me is the best value that I've seen in rookie drafts consistently. Tier 6, picks 202 to 205, have wide receiver Christian Watson, the quarterbacks here, and Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis, and then running back Rachaad White from Tampa Bay. Watson, another guy that you're not going to get where we have him ranked. I don't understand why him and Bell are so flip-flopped. the market has basically Watson going where we think Bell should, and we have um, Watson going where the market has Bell going. So we have it flipped from the market on Christian Watson and David Bell. I think the quarterbacks are strong picks here, and I've seen them last. Willis is your swing for the fences pick. This, don't expect anything this year, but if he hits, he's going to hit in a huge way because he's going to run so much that he's going to be an elite fantasy contributor at the quarterback position. We're talking about a top 8 type of player at the position, which is just massive to be able to hit on that and potentially hit on that in the second round. But as Anthony Amico told me when I was talking about him, about possibly taking him at the end of the first round in one of my rookie drafts, because I was so starved for quarterback, he's like, you know, if Willis started the draft process as a third round prospect and got drafted in the third round right where he did, you would have never considered it. So keep that in mind, that we might have some tainted optimistic bias towards Willis because a few weeks ago we thought he was going to be a round 1 quarterback and possibly the 102 in Superflex startup or Superflex rookie drafts. Ritter, in some situations, I like Ritter more than Willis because I think he's going to play this year. And Sean Siegel of Rotoviz made a really good point. This was prior to the quarterbacks landing spots, but I still think even with worse draft capital than expected on the non-Pickett quarterbacks, it's true that a lot of these quarterbacks, as soon as they start a game, they have enough fantasy upside with their rushing ability that you're going to be able to flip them for more than what you got them for. So if you have a high probability of a trade window where you're going to net even in the future, get something back similarly that similar to the cost of the draft pick that you used to spend on the player or better, it's a free roll to a certain extent. And I feel that way with Ritter a little bit, as long as he's not awful to start games. So he's a good pick in here. Tier 7, picks 206 to 210. We have Trey McBride, Damian Pierce, Matt Corral, John Metsy, and Wan'Dale Robinson. This is my last ranked tier. Matt Corral, to me, is somewhere in between Willis and Ritter, where he's got this high rushing upside, somewhat like Willis, more so than Ritter, and he's got a little bit more opportunity to play, kind of like Ritter. He's in Carolina. If he does play, he could be successful from a fantasy standpoint because the good supporting cast, you've got DJ Moore there, you've got Christian McCaffrey. He's going to run. He's going to score fantasy points basically if he starts. And because Sam Darnold's on his last legs, he could start. And as soon as he does that, I mean, he could be worth a lot very quickly if he's able to start. So I'm really high on taking a shot on Corral in the middle back end of the second round, but do have Trey McBride kicking off this tier. I think he's the clear tight end 1 prospect. Mother effing Mackey Award winner. He slipped to the 304 in a tight end premium draft of mine, which I was really surprised, and I took him there at the 304. So I like McBride. If you're really tight end thirsty, I honestly think McBride a little bit earlier, where the tier 6 guys I have ranked, is totally fine as well. Mechie, Wan'Dale Robinson, it's just good value based on the wide receiver draft capital. Those guys are fine. Wan'Dale Robinson, I got at the 306. I think his ADP is in the 3rd round. So he's a strong target for us at the beginning of the 3rd round. And Damian Pierce, I've seen go all over the place. Some leagues, people are really overvaluing the fact that he's going to see touches right away, which is a good thing, but they're overvaluing it in rookie drafts. So I've seen him go early 2nd, which I think is too much. But if he falls to mid-late 2nd and you are RB thirsty, you need someone to come in right away. I think he's a fine selection there. Once we get outside of the first 2 rounds, the hit rates drop off quite a bit. I have linked somewhere in here to an article I did last year looking at the hit rates by round in single quarterback leagues. And basically, when you get to mid-late 2nd, it drops off a ton. You add in Superflex, that's basically late 2nd, early 3rd. The hit rates really drop off on players. And so when that happens, I'm somewhat focused on 2 things. I'm focused on these really low probability but high upside plays. So for me, the guy last year that I hit on, and again, missed on a lot of guys because the vast majority of these guys are going to miss anyways, but especially these really high risk plays. But Elijah Mitchell was someone that showed a ton of athleticism, only got picked in the 6th round, but he went to a team in San Francisco where, it's like if he makes the team with his athleticism and the scheme, that's such a good sign. You're gonna win right away. Now, of course, the year went better than anyone could have expected for Elijah Mitchell, but yeah, that's the type of bet I want to make. And uh, so that's one type of bet. The other type are guys that have cleaner routes to playing time than maybe they should for where they're going in rookie drafts or even where they went in the NFL draft. And there were two guys on the Texans last year that I liked a lot, Davis Mills and Nico Collins. I think Nico's value probably didn't change much from last year, but he did see the field like we had hoped. And Mills was definitely, plus return on investment. He got to play right away. He's going to get a shot to start this year, it seems. And you can flip Mills for a profit or just ride out some QB starts with him. So some of the guys that I'm looking at that fit that bill later round in the draft, and make sure you refer to our rankings because some of these guys are guys you're going to take in the 3rd round. Some of these are guys you might take in the 5th round. So keep that in mind. But two guys on Kansas City, again, if you, and as far as the low probability, high upside plays, landing spot matters. If you can crack playing time on a really good offense, you can do some very positive things from a fantasy perspective. So Justin Ross and Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. Ross was an undrafted free agent. He is someone that has just had a really tough go of it with injuries, but it's elite landing spot. The athleticism was there when he was healthy. The pedigree was there in college before, his career got tainted by injuries. Couldn't ask for a perfect spot. And there's a route to playing there. I mean, obviously they signed Juju, they drafted Sky Moore, they do have MVS and McCole Hardman, but it's not, there's names there, there's bodies there, but none of them are overly intimidating, especially after you get past Juju Smith-Schuster. And as far as Pacheco goes, he's someone that JJ Zachariason of lateround.com has sold me on with. He's a burner, great spark score type of player, and that big playability in the Kansas City offense is enticing. And again, this dude might not even make the team, but if he makes the team, the second he makes the team, you've already won in terms of what you've likely invested in him in terms of acquiring him. Sticking with the speed theme, Danny Gray, San Francisco, he ran a 4.33 40. They draft him. He's on a team that has historically just, under Shanahan, been a very efficient offense. Now there's Deebo Samuel trade rumors. Don't mind taking a shot on Danny Gray. Even in some of my redraft best ball leagues, he's someone that I'm pairing with Trey Lance to get unique in round 18 or so in some of those tournaments. Sam Howell for Washington. He's Matt Corral light to me. I think he's going to perform pretty well from a fantasy perspective if he can see the field. It's not as clean of a situation as Corral, but like Corral, quarterback in front of him who doesn't exactly inspire confidence in Carson Wentz. He's not very good. And there are some there is talent on this offense for Hall to work with if he can get in there. You've got Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, Antonio Gibson. They drafted Jahan Dotson. So I like how later, if you start getting end of the 3rd round, early 4th, generally you don't get upside quarterbacks like that. And if he does start this year at any point, again, you've immediately recouped your investment because you're going to be able to move him in the offseason or just benefit from those starts. A couple of the players I like that as far as routes to playing time, Romeo Dubes for Green Bay is Anthony Amico called him a 4-year prospect with an early career breakout who provides some arbitrage on his rookie teammate Watson. Green Bay depth chart at wide receiver, not intimidating whatsoever. You've got Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins. They bring in Christian Watson as a receiver who's very raw and athletic, but doesn't have a great production profile from a small school. So very risky, especially as far as immediate contributions go. I think Watson's actually going too early. You can take Romeo Dubes later at a much lower cost and maybe benefit from the landing spot in that way. Keontae Ingram for Arizona is another running back I like. big back that has a decent receiving profile coming out of college. And this depth chart at running back for Arizona is bleak. I mean, you've got James Conner, who we love from a redraft perspective, but not exactly someone, that's a huge long-term player. He's someone that in past years has been considered like a running back dead zone type guy. And behind him is basically, Benjamin right now, who is in his third season as he was brought in 2 years ago. Not a lot of draft capital in him. Was behind Jonathan Ward last year when Chase Edmonds was hurt and James Conner was, playing. So it just doesn't, he really has just failed to make his mark. So I like Keontae Ingram. He could possibly take the Chase Edmonds role out of the gate. And if something happens to James Conner, you know, a bigger role could be carved out for Ingram. And if you start looking at other running backs that are going to be taken outside of the first 2 or 3 rounds of dynasty rookie drafts, there just aren't that many backs that you can say that about. And you can say it about Ingram. So before I log off, I'm just going to go through picks trades I've made just so people have reference to things I've actually done in my leagues. My FFPC rookie drafts all kicked off yesterday. So it's most of that type of format. And I haven't gotten out of the 3rd round yet, but this is what I've done so far. So I already noted in a league where I'm contending now and need running back help, I traded the 101, essentially traded Breece Hall for DeAndre Swift on a contending team. Had another team that's contending, but just built to last, where I just ran into a lot of high quality running backs, which isn't a bad thing. But again, talk about the riskiness and lack of longevity on running backs. I had Dalvin Cook, James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, Najee Harris, and Joe Mixon in a league where you can start a lot of backs, but you only have to start 2. I wanted to start reducing some of the risk that some of the value of my team being locked up in running back. So I traded Dalvin Cook for the 103, where I will happily take either Drake London or Treylon Burks. Noted earlier, I had that trade where I traded the 102 and a 2023 second for the 107 and 108. 107 ended up being Chris Olave, and 108 ended up being Kenny Pickett. So didn't fall amazing for me about as expected. But I think that's okay. Essentially, I took Olave over Drake London, and as a reward for that sacrifice, I was able to get Kenny Pickett for a 2023 second. Took David Bell at the 206. He seems like an elite value in the 2nd round. He's consistently making it into the 2nd round. I've quite often seen him middle of 2nd round or later. Took Trey McBride at the 304, even on a team that had tight end strength. This is a team where I had Mark Andrews, had George Kittle, but again, in tight end premium, McBride should not be making it to the 3rd round. That same league, I took Wan'Dale Robinson at 306, who I think, like, I understand the knocks against Robinson, but similar to Kadarius Toney, he's different than Kadarius Toney because he doesn't have the same size. Like, we have these huge size issues with Wan'Dale Robinson that we didn't have with Kadarius Toney, but similar to Toney in that I think people are putting way too much stock. They're putting all this stock into his weaknesses, but they're not putting any stock into, oh, hey, he had decent draft capital and he landed in an organization that he thinks on the rise, at least offensively, with Brian Daboll. And one rebuilding team, I had picked 104, 106. Just pretty easy. Take best wide receiver available. Took Treylon Burks at the 104. Took Jameson Williams at the 106. That was a league where I did take Williams over Olave, even though I have that flipped in my rankings, just to diversify, because Olave lasts deeper into rookie drafts more often. So, at the 106 was a chance to just take Jameson Williams and be done with it. Haven't gotten to the point where I've taken any veterans in these drafts, but I'm getting close to it. And again, if you're in the FFPC leagues where you cut down to 14 players, that's a huge difference in some of these dynasty leagues I'm in that I run, where you're holding 30 players each year and you're carrying over all 30, except for the cuts that maybe you're cutting down to 24 to make room for your rookie picks or something like that. But the vets I have more of my eye on, because if I'm at I'm in a league where I'm at 311 and need RB2 help, and I'm considering taking Raheem Mostert over, a developmental prospect that I'm basically going to have to hold, because there's a good chance I'm going to have to cut that hold at 311 anyways. So I have to cut down to 14 guys. That's not that much. So at that point, I'm thinking more immediate value. I don't want to go overboard with it, but you have to keep in mind what your league format is when you're deciding in these rookie free agent drafts. At what point do I pivot from the long-term upside on these rookies and stop taking those gambles to just shoring up some immediate value and trying to make my team as good as possible to give the best chance of winning now, um, as you can. Okay, I hope you found this beneficial. If you did, rate, review us on iTunes, like and subscribe the Establish the Run YouTube page, and make sure you check out the Establish the Run draft kit, which will be launching this week. I'm recording this on Sunday, May 8th, and I believe the draft kit should be launched early in the week, starting Monday, May 9th. So either Monday or Tuesday, but definitely this week it'll be launched. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and best of luck in all of your rookie drafts.